A soft breeze rustled the leaves as four friends, Emma, Jack, Sarah, and Mike, drove down the winding forest road. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the dense trees. Excitement buzzed in the air. They had been planning this camping trip for months. Emma, the organizer of the group, had always wanted to explore the mysterious Redwood Forest. She had heard stories about it but dismissed them as local legends. Jack, her adventurous boyfriend, was thrilled about the chance to escape the city. Sarah, with her love for nature photography, was eager to capture the forest's beauty. Mike, the joker of the group, was looking forward to a weekend of laughter and good times. They finally reached the campsite, a small clearing surrounded by towering redwoods. "This place is perfect," Sarah exclaimed, setting up her camera. The group quickly got to work pitching their tents and gathering wood for a fire. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. The friends sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Laughter echoed through the trees, but as the night deepened, an unsettling silence settled over the camp. Mike was the first to notice. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice low. The others paused, listening intently. There was a faint rustling in the underbrush, but nothing more. They laughed it off, attributing it to a small animal. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced around nervously, her eyes scanning the dark forest. "It's probably just the wind," she reassured herself. As the fire died down and the friends retired to their tents, an uneasy feeling lingered in the air. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating something sinister. Emma lay awake, listening to the sounds of the night, her heart pounding in her chest. Little did they know, their dream camping trip was about to turn into a nightmare they would never forget. First night. The first night in the forest started peacefully enough. The friends sat around the campfire, the warm glow illuminating their faces as they told stories and joked around. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. As the evening wore on, Jack suggested they tell scary stories. "What's a camping trip without a little spooky fun?" he said with a grin. The group agreed, and one by one, they shared their favorite ghost tales. Laughter mixed with shivers of fear as each story grew more chilling than the last. Just as Sarah was finishing her story about a haunted cabin in the woods, a loud snap echoed through the forest. Everyone froze, their eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" Emma whispered, clutching Jack's arm. "It's probably just a branch breaking," Jack said, trying to sound confident. But even he couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Mike, always the skeptic, stood up and grabbed a flashlight. "I'll go check it out," he declared, heading towards the sound. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and undergrowth. "See? It's nothing," he called back over his shoulder. But as he turned to head back to the campfire, he caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. It was just for a moment, but it was enough to send a chill down his spine. He hurried back to the group, forcing a laugh. "Guess my imagination is running wild." The friends decided it was time to call it a night. They doused the fire and retreated to their tents, still trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. The forest was eerily quiet now, the usual sounds of the night creatures absent. Emma lay in her tent, listening to the rustling of the trees. She couldn't sleep, her mind replaying the events of the evening. Every little noise made her jump, her heart racing. She glanced over at Jack, who was already fast asleep, oblivious to the tension that gripped her. Suddenly, a low whispering sound drifted through the tent. Emma sat up, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but she couldn't make out any words. Her pulse quickened, and she reached out to shake Jack awake. "Jack, wake up. Do you hear that?" Jack stirred, groggy and annoyed. "Hear what?" he mumbled. "The whispering." "Listen," Emma insisted. Jack listened for a moment, then shook his head. "It's just the wind, Em. Go back to sleep. Emma lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. The whispering continued, and she felt a cold dread settle over her. She pulled her sleeping bag tighter around her, hoping morning would come quickly. Outside, the forest seemed to close in on the campsite, the darkness hiding unknown horrors. The friends had no idea that their nightmare was just beginning. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows through the dense trees. The friends emerged from their tents, yawning and stretching, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling from the night before. The forest looked less menacing in the daylight, but the memory of the whispers still lingered in Emma's mind. After a quick breakfast, they decided to explore the forest. Sarah led the way, her camera ready to capture the natural beauty. "Let's see if we can find that waterfall the ranger mentioned," she said enthusiastically. As they trekked deeper into the woods, they noticed strange symbols carved into the tree trunks. Jack examined one closely, tracing the lines with his finger. "These look ancient," he said, a frown creasing his forehead. "I wonder what they mean." "Probably just some old markings," Mike said, dismissing it. But there was an undercurrent of tension in his voice that hadn't been there before. They continued walking, the forest growing thicker and more oppressive. The air felt heavy, and the usual sounds of wildlife were eerily absent. Suddenly, Sarah stopped, pointing to something on the ground. "Look at this," she said, her voice trembling. In front of them lay an old, tattered backpack, half buried in the underbrush. It looked like it had been there for years. Jack picked it up and opened it, revealing a few faded photographs and a journal. "This must belong to someone who got lost here," he murmured, flipping through the pages. Emma shivered, a sense of foreboding washing over her. "We should take this back to the campsite and see if we can find out more about who it belonged to," she suggested. Back at the campsite, they pored over the journal. It belonged to a hiker named Tom, who had camped in the forest years ago. His last entries were disturbing, describing strange noises, sightings of shadowy figures, and a growing sense of dread. The final entry was hastily scrawled, "Something is out there. It's watching me. I have to get out." The friends exchanged uneasy glances. "Do you think he made it out?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't look like it," Mike said grimly. "This forest is starting to creep me out." As the day wore on, the tension only grew. They tried to continue their exploration, but the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set their nerves on edge. In the afternoon, Emma and Jack went to collect firewood while Sarah and Mike stayed at the campsite. Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Jack, do you feel like we're not alone out here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the forest. "Yeah, something's not right. We should stick together tonight." They returned to the campsite with an armful of firewood, only to find Sarah looking pale and frightened. "Mike went to get water from the stream, but he's been gone for over an hour," she said, her voice shaking. Panic set in as they called out for Mike, their voices echoing through the silent forest. After what felt like an eternity, Mike stumbled back into the clearing, his clothes torn and his face pale. "I got lost," he gasped. "Something was following me. I could hear it breathing." The friends huddled together, fear tightening its grip on their hearts. They knew now that they weren't alone in the forest. Something dark and malevolent was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the campsite, the friends felt a growing sense of dread. They gathered around the fire, its flickering light the only thing keeping the encroaching darkness at bay. The silence of the forest was oppressive, the usual nighttime sounds conspicuously absent. "Let's all stay close tonight," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Everyone nodded in agreement, their faces pale and tense. The fire crackled, and the friends tried to distract themselves with idle chatter, but their minds kept drifting back to the strange occurrences of the day. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, sending chills down their spines. They all turned in unison, eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but we need to stay calm," Jack said, trying to keep his composure. "Everyone stay together." The growling grew louder, closer. They could hear the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. The friends huddled together, clutching makeshift weapons, sticks and rocks, desperate to defend themselves. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the darkness, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was tall, with elongated limbs and sharp claws that gleamed in the firelight. "Run!" Jack shouted, but it was too late. The creature lunged at them, moving with inhuman speed. It swiped at Mike, who managed to dodge just in time, but its claws tore through his shirt, leaving deep gashes in his flesh. Mike screamed in pain, stumbling back. Sarah grabbed a burning stick from the fire and swung it at the creature, the flames casting wild shadows on the trees. The creature recoiled, hissing in anger, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it circled them, eyes glowing with a sinister intelligence. "Get to the tents," Emma yelled. The friends scrambled towards the tents, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. The creature followed, its growls reverberating through the night. Inside the tent, Emma fumbled for her flashlight, her hands shaking. She clicked it on, the beam piercing the darkness. Outside, the creature's silhouette loomed large, its glowing eyes fixed on them. "Stay quiet," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, the tension unbearable. The creature prowled around the campsite, its growl sending shivers down their spines. Finally, it seemed to lose interest and disappeared back into the forest. The friends let out a collective sigh of relief, but their reprieve was short-lived. The forest remained silent, the oppressive atmosphere heavy with unspoken threats. They knew they had to do something, but fear paralyzed them. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "We can't stay here," Jack said. "We need to find help. There's no way we can survive another night like this." Reluctantly, the friends packed up what little they could carry, their movements swift and quiet. They knew they had to leave the campsite, but the thought of venturing into the dark forest filled them with dread. As they made their way through the trees, every sound, every shadow seemed to hide a new threat. The sense of being watched grew stronger, the forest closing in around them. They moved in silence, their fear palpable, their determination wavering. Suddenly, the growling returned, louder and more menacing than before. The friends broke into a run, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The creature was right behind them, its footsteps thundering in their ears. In the chaos, Sarah stumbled and fell, crying out in pain. Jack and Emma turned back to help her, but the creature was too fast. It lunged at Sarah, its claws slashing through the air. Jack swung his flashlight at it, trying to fend it off, but the creature was relentless. With a final, desperate effort, Jack and Emma managed to pull Sarah to her feet and continue running. The creature's growls faded into the distance, but the friends knew it was only a matter of time before it found them again. As they stumbled through the dark forest, they realized the true horror of their situation. They were trapped, hunted by a malevolent force that showed no mercy. Their only hope was to find a way out before it was too late. The friends huddled together in a small clearing, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They had been running for what felt like hours, but the relentless pursuit of the creature left them no choice. Exhausted and terrified, they knew they had to come up with a plan. "We can't keep running like this," Jack said, his voice trembling. "We need to find a place to hide or some way to defend ourselves." "There's an old legend about this forest," Mike said, his voice shaky. "I remember hearing it when I was a kid. They say there's a cursed site deep within these woods, where dark rituals were performed. Maybe that's what's causing all of this." Emma's eyes widened. "Do you think finding that place might help us stop whatever's happening?" It's a long shot, Mike admitted, but it's the only idea we've got. Sarah, still shaken from her fall, nodded. We have to try. We can't survive another night like this. With renewed determination, the friends set off deeper into the forest, following Mike's vague recollection of the legend. The trees seemed to close in around them, the darkness growing thicker with each step. Every sound made them jump, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. As they walked, Emma felt a growing sense of dread. The forest seemed to be watching them, its malevolent presence pressing down on them. She glanced at Jack, his face set in grim determination, and drew strength from his resolve. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a crumbling stone altar, covered in strange symbols similar to the ones they had seen earlier. The air around it was heavy with an oppressive energy, and the friends knew they had found the cursed site. This must be it, Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. We need to figure out how to break the curse. They approached the altar cautiously, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. Sarah spotted an old, tattered book lying at the base of the altar. She picked it up, carefully opening its fragile pages. It's in a language I don't understand, she said, frustration evident in her voice. Emma took the book from her, flipping through the pages. There are drawings here. Maybe we can figure out what they mean. The friends gathered around, studying the illustrations. They depicted dark rituals, sacrifices, and strange symbols. One drawing showed a figure holding a torch, standing before the altar. I think we need to perform some kind of ritual to break the curse, Emma said, her voice filled with uncertainty. Jack found an old torch lying nearby and lit it with a match. The flickering light cast eerie shadows on the altar, making the symbols seem to writhe and twist. The friends took their places around the altar, following the instructions as best they could. As they chanted the words from the book, a low rumbling filled the air. The ground beneath them shook, and the oppressive energy around the altar intensified. The friends continued, their voices growing louder, driven by desperation. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the altar, and the rumbling stopped. The oppressive energy dissipated, leaving the clearing eerily quiet. The friends stood in stunned silence, unsure if they had succeeded. Did it work? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, the growling returned, louder and more menacing than before. The friends turned to see the creature emerging from the shadows, its eyes glowing with rage. They had only made it angrier. Panic set in as they realized their desperate attempt had failed. The creature lunged at them, its claws slashing through the air. Jack swung the torch at it, trying to fend it off, but the creature was relentless. We need to run, Mike shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her away from the altar. Emma and Jack followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. The friends ran through the forest, the creature hot on their heels. The ritual had been their last hope, and now they were out of options. As they stumbled through the darkness, they knew their chances of survival were slim. But they refused to give up. They had to keep fighting, keep running, no matter how hopeless it seemed. Because in the end, it was all they could do. The friends dashed through the forest, the creature's growls echoing behind them. Their hearts pounded, and every step felt like a desperate race against time. The forest seemed endless, its dark, twisted branches grabbing at them as if trying to pull them back. We can't keep running, Jack yelled, his voice strained. We need to find a way to stop this thing. Emma glanced around, searching for any sign of hope. There has to be something we missed, something that can help us. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a small, ancient cabin hidden among the trees. It looked abandoned, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. In here, Sarah shouted, leading the way inside. They slammed the door shut behind them, barricading it with whatever they could find. The cabin was dark and musty, filled with old, rotting furniture. A large, dusty book lay open on a table, its pages covered in strange symbols and diagrams. Mike hurried over to the book, flipping through its pages. This must be the answer. There has to be something in here that can help us. As Mike read aloud, the cabin shook with the creature's furious roars. It clawed at the walls, trying to break through. "We don't have much time," Jack urged, gripping a rusty axe he found in the corner. Emma joined Mike, scanning the book for anything useful. "Here," she exclaimed, pointing to a page. "It says we need to use fire and these symbols to trap the creature." Jack quickly drew the symbols on the floor with chalk, his hands trembling. Sarah lit a few remaining torches, their flames flickering in the dim light. "We need to lure it inside," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The friends positioned themselves around the symbols, ready to face the creature. Jack threw open the door, and the creature burst in, its eyes blazing with fury. It lunged at them, but they held their ground, forcing it into the center of the symbols. "Now!" Emma shouted. Sarah and Mike thrust the torches at the creature, the flames dancing wildly. The creature recoiled, trapped within the circle of symbols. The friends chanted the incantation from the book, their voices strong and unwavering. The creature thrashed and howled, but it couldn't escape. The symbols glowed brightly, and the air filled with a blinding light. With a final, agonized scream, the creature vanished, leaving only a charred mark on the floor. The friends collapsed, exhausted and shaken, but alive. They had faced the darkness and won, but the cost had been great. The cabin fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The friends knew they couldn't stay any longer. They gathered their belongings and made their way back through the forest, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. As they reached the edge of the forest, Emma looked back one last time. The forest seemed peaceful now, but she knew the memory of their nightmare would haunt them forever. The sun was rising as the friends emerged from the forest, their bodies aching and their minds reeling from the horrors they had faced. The world outside seemed almost surreal, a stark contrast to the nightmare they had just survived. They walked in silence, the weight of their ordeal hanging heavy in the air. Back at the campsite, they quickly packed up their belongings, eager to leave the forest behind. Emma glanced around nervously, half expecting to see the creature lurking in the shadows. But the forest was quiet, the malevolent presence seemingly gone. "Let's get out of here," Jack said, his voice hoarse. The others nodded in agreement, their expressions grim. As they drove away from the campsite, the tension slowly began to ease. The familiar sights and sounds of civilization brought a small measure of comfort, but the memories of their terrifying experience lingered in their minds. They stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town, hoping to regain some sense of normalcy. The friends sat in a booth, their faces pale and drawn. The waitress brought them coffee and breakfast, but none of them had much of an appetite. "We need to report what happened," Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence. "People need to know about the dangers in that forest." Mike nodded. "But who will believe us? They'll think we're crazy." "We have the journal and the book," Emma said. "Maybe someone can make sense of it, figure out what that thing was." They finished their meal in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they left the diner, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that their nightmare wasn't truly over. The forest had taken something from them, a sense of security that they would never fully regain. Days turned into weeks, and the friends tried to return to their normal lives. But the events of that night haunted them, their dreams filled with images of the creature and the dark forest. They kept in touch, supporting each other as they dealt with the trauma. One evening, Emma received a package in the mail. It was from a local historian she had contacted about the journal and the book. Inside was a letter and a small, old photograph. The letter explained that the symbols and rituals in the book were part of an ancient cult that had once inhabited the forest. The cult had performed dark rituals to summon and control malevolent spirits. The photograph showed a group of people standing in front of the altar they had found in the forest. Emma's blood ran cold as she recognized one of the faces. It was the same creature that had terrorized them. The historian's letter ended with a chilling warning: the forest holds many secrets. Be cautious, for the darkness that once dwelled there may still linger. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew the historian was right. The forest might seem peaceful now, but the darkness they had encountered was far from vanquished. She shared the letter and photograph with her friends, and they made a pact to never return to the forest. But deep down, Emma knew that the forest would always be a part of them. The memory of their camping nightmare would stay with them forever, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of the known world. As she placed the photograph and letter in a drawer, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter with the darkness was only the beginning. The forest had claimed a piece of this.